picture the scene. It is December 23rd, 2024, just one day before Christmas Eve.
Right.
You are in the coastal town of Torres, down in southern Brazil, sitting in a living room with your extended family. Like 7 people are gathered for this festive afternoon tea.
A really normal holiday setup.
Exactly. And a 61-year-old grandmother named Zali walks in carrying a freshly baked bolo de Natal. It is this traditional Brazilian Christmas cake, packed with candied fruits. It smells absolutely amazing.
Yeah, the kind of thing you look forward to all year.
Right. So Zali cuts the cake, passes the slices around, but almost immediately after taking a bite, her brother-in-law just stops chewing. He notices this incredibly strange, bitter, almost spicy taste.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. He spits it out, assumes the ingredients have gone bad or something, and tells everyone to stop eating right away.
But for several people in that room, that warning comes entirely too late. Because within a matter of minutes, the family members who actually swallowed the cake become violently ill. I mean, they are hit with severe abdominal pain, uncontrollable vomiting, and soon people are literally collapsing on the living room floor.
That is just terrifying.
It is. Ambulances are rushed to the house, and despite massive emergency interventions at the hospital, 3 women, Zillie's sister, her sister-in-law, and her niece, they all die of cardiac arrest.
God.
And 3 others, including Zillie herself, are left clinging to life in the ICU.
Now, at first, you would completely assume this is a horrific, tragic case of accidental food poisoning, right? Like maybe a really bad batch of flour or severely expired milk.
Sure, that is what anyone would think.
But then the doctors run tests on the victim's blood and urine, and the results completely turn a tragic accident into a terrifying crime scene.
Exactly. Because the hospital's toxicology reports came back showing massive, overwhelming amounts of arsenic in their system.
Arsenic?
Yeah. We are talking about up to 350 times the lethal dose for an adult human being.
That is staggering.
It is. This was not spoiled food. This was a targeted, meticulous, and deliberate biological attack on a family.
Well, welcome to this deep dive. Today, we are looking at a stack of incredibly detailed sources. We've got investigative reports from CNN Brazil, the New York Post, Carta Capital, and even local police transcripts.
Oh, a ground to cover.
Yeah, definitely. Our mission today is to trace the timeline of a seemingly ordinary family. We want to understand how a 20-year domestic dispute quietly escalated into one of the most devastating crimes in recent history. Okay, let's unpack this.
Let's do it.
To understand who would systematically poison a family's Christmas cake and, why they would do it, we really have to rewind the clock. We need to look at the woman who quickly became the prime suspect.
Right. Zillie's 42-year-old daughter-in-law, Diri's Moura dos Anjos.
Yeah. So where does a story like this actually begin? Because it didn't start with the cake.
No, not at all. If you really want to understand the origins of this, you have to go all the way back to the year 2001. That is when Diri's and her future husband, Diego, first met at a local dance.
So they were young.
Very young. They were just kids, really. She was 19, he was 17. They fell in love, dated for 3 years, and eventually decided to get married. But even during that early dating period, long before any wedding invitations were ever sent out, there was severe friction between Diri's and Diego's parents.
Especially his mother, Zali, right?
Exactly. Particularly Zali.
I mean, we have all heard stories about in-law drama. It is a very common trope. But the specific anecdotes from our sources show that this wasn't just normal, everyday bickering. There were some massive early red flags.
Oh, absolutely.
Can you walk us through what happened with their wedding? Because that seems like a huge turning point.
Yeah, the wedding in 2004 is a perfect example of the dynamic that would define the next 2 decades. Diri's had this very specific vision for her big day. She wanted to get married in the main sanctuary of the local church.
Pretty standard bride stuff.
Right. But then Diego's older cousin stepped in and claimed that she had priority for that exact venue simply because she was the older cousin.
Wait, keep in mind, this cousin wasn't even engaged to be married yet.
Exactly. She just called dibs on the church.
So someone who isn't even engaged claims dibs on a venue, and the family just goes along with it. I mean, imagine you are the bride in that scenario. You would expect your fiancé, or at least your future in-laws, to stand up for you.
And that's exactly what D's expected. But they didn't. Diego and his parents stayed completely silent. They didn't want to rock the boat with the extended family, so they just didn't support D's claim at all.
Wow. So she is just left out to dry.
Yeah, she felt entirely invalidated and profoundly disrespected. So out of sheer spite, and because she felt forced into a corner, she ended up holding her wedding ceremony on the second floor of a smaller chapel. She absolutely refused to use the main floor.
It sounds like a turf war over who actually controls the family hierarchy.
That is a great way to put it. That was the first major visible fracture in the family foundation.
And then, shortly after that compromised wedding, in August of 2004, the mother-in-law, Zelly, does something that takes this quiet resentment and just pours absolute gasoline on it.
Yes, she does. Just after the newlyweds merge their lives, Zelia goes to the local bank and withdraws about $600 directly from Daisy and Diego's newly formed joint account.
Wait, she just went into their account,
Yes, she didn't ask for permission. She didn't warn them. She just took the money.
which is a massive boundary violation. You don't just dip into a newly married couple's bank account. How did Zaley even try to explain that away?
Well, Zelia actually returned the money a couple of days later and apologized. Her defense was that she had simply used the wrong bank card by mistake.
Oh, come on.
Right. If you look at this from Daisy's perspective, that excuse is impossible to believe. Daly argued that you don't just accidentally slip the wrong card into an ATM and then magically know the correct PN number to withdraw cash.
No, of course not. That takes effort.
Exactly. For Tadise, this was a deliberate, calculated test of power. She saw it as Zealy trying to prove that she still controlled her son and his finances, even after he was married to another woman.
I can see why she would think that.
And the resulting argument over this withdrawal escalated so violently that the police were actually called to the house to calm things down.
Over a bank withdrawal. So
Mhm.
instead of addressing this or, going to therapy or simply setting healthy boundaries, DZ starts keeping a meticulous permanent scorecard.
A mental ledger of every wrong.
Right. According to the sources, a year later, DZ gave Diego an ultimatum. She told him, "It is either me or your family." And when that older cousin, the one from the church dispute, finally did get married, DZ told Diego that if he dared to attend that wedding, she would file for divorce immediately.
And Diego actually complied.
He did. He cut ties with his own cousin just to keep the peace at home. But how does a grudge like this survive for 20 years? Most people get exhausted being that angry all the time.
Well, it survives because the grievance becomes a core part of the person's identity. Deise cultivated this reality where she was perpetually the victim of her husband's family.
Right.
Now, normally when a family hits this level of toxic conflict, they naturally separate. They stop calling, they stop visiting, and that physical distance usually allows the immediate emotional tension to fade away.
Just kind of let things cool off.
Yeah, and for a long time it looked like that was exactly what was happening here. In 2013, Diego's job at an agricultural company transferred him to the state of Goiás, which is a massive distance away from their hometown.
You would naturally assume that moving to another state would bring some peace. Out of sight, out of mind. The daily frictions are gone.
You would think so, but the sources indicate the exact opposite happened. The best way to understand this is to think of it like a petri dish.
Okay, how so?
When you are isolated in a new place, completely removed from your normal support systems, whatever negative emotions you brought with, you have a vacuum to grow in. There are no competing positive family interactions to keep the resentment in check.
Ah, I see. It just festers.
Exactly. Didie struggled heavily with being away from her own parents. She became deeply isolated, dealing with documented depression, and the couple fought constantly. Even from hundreds of miles away, she would frequently accuse Diego of secretly favoring his mother over her.
So the distance actually just concentrated the paranoia?
Yes.
And even when they finally moved back closer to their hometown years later and built a comfortable life, they had a large house with a pool, that underlying hostility was just sitting there completely unresolved, waiting for a spark.
And that spark finally arrived during the COVID-19 pandemic.
Right, the 2020 lockdowns.
Yeah, strict social distancing rules were in effect across Brazil. Dee's and Diego's young son was having his kindergarten graduation, and Dee's explicitly forbade her in-laws from attending the ceremony.
Because of the pandemic rules.
That is what she cited, yeah. She strictly used the COVID protocols as her reasoning. But Celie was absolutely furious. She felt she was being robbed of a milestone photo opportunity with her grandson.
And I bet that went over terribly.
Oh! It exploded. The argument that erupted over this was so severe that Zelly formally blocked the D's on all social media platforms. For 2 straight years, the two women did not speak a single syllable to each other.
2 whole years of silence.
Yes, and during this exact same period, Dadizi's co-workers at her accounting job noticed she was exhibiting severe signs of stress. She had deepening depression, and she was developing these intense, obsessive-compulsive cleaning habits.
It is a total Cold War. The silence isn't peace. It is just a fortified border. They are entirely separated.
Right.
But then in May of 2024, an external disaster completely levels those borders. It's just like the Trojan horse, you know? A disaster drops their defenses and she gets right inside the gates.
That is a very accurate way to look at it.
The state of Rio Grande do Sul experiences historic, catastrophic flooding. It was a massive natural disaster, and the in-laws' home was completely destroyed by the floodwaters.
When a disaster like that hits, normal social rules go out the window. Setting aside the 2-year feud, Denise takes her in-laws into her own home for 4 days while the floodwaters recede.
Wow.
She even goes out and helps them buy emergency supplies. From the outside, to the rest of the family, it looked like this beautiful, heartwarming reconciliation born out of a shared tragedy.
But looking at the investigative timeline, that flood was essentially a broken levee that let Dias right back into their lives. She finally had physical proximity again.
Exactly. From a purely forensic standpoint, that proximity gave Dias the one critical element she had previously lacked access.
Access to her targets.
Yes. Once the in-laws managed to relocate to a rental house in a nearby town after the floods, Diaz and Diego started visiting them on weekends. And almost instantly, the old complaints resurfaced.
She couldn't let it go.
No. Diaz started telling people that Diego only paid attention to his mother when they visited. The flood reconciliation was a complete facade. And this is exactly the moment where the story shifts from a sad tale of family grievances into a terrifying series of actual trial runs for murder.
This brings us to September 2024, just a few months after the floods. Tell us what happened to the father-in-law, Paulo.
Well, in September, Paulo suddenly falls violently ill and dies. At the time, absolutely everyone thinks it is a tragic, natural accident. He had just eaten some bananas and drank some coffee with powdered milk that Diaz had brought over.
Oh, so she provided the food.
Yes. Shortly after, he passed away from what doctors assumed was an incredibly severe case of food poisoning. Given the recent catastrophic floods, it was highly plausible to everyone that the fruit or the local water supply had simply been contaminated by floodwaters.
Which makes sense in a disaster zone. But the police transcripts show that Derice's behavior right after his death was a massive red flag.
It really was.
She immediately took complete charge of the funeral arrangements, and she pushed incredibly hard for a fast cremation. When 2 separate doctors refused to sign a standard death certificate because it was a sudden, entirely unexplained death, Diaz actually hired a lawyer and sued the doctors.
She was absolutely desperate to have his body legally destroyed before anyone could look closer. And her psychological manipulation during the time was intense.
How so?
Well, when Ziels, who is newly grieving her husband, kept trying to figure out what exactly made him so sick, Diaz aggressively shut her down. She told Zili to stop looking for culprits.
Just trying to silence her?
Exactly. And even worse, Diaz intentionally made her own husband, Diego, feel guilty. She reminded him that he was the one who had physically carried the bag of fruit into the house.
That is unbelievably cold, to make your own husband think he accidentally killed his father.
It is incredibly cruel.
And then, shockingly, she turns her sights on Diego himself. Just a month later, in October 2024, Diego falls violently ill.
He develops a high fever, severe stomach pain, and is incapacitated for weeks. And the investigative sources detail a highly specific, terrifying moment during this period.
What happened?
DA serves Diego a glass of mango juice. But before Diego can finish it, their 10-year-old son walks into the room and accidentally takes a large gulp from his father's glass.
Oh my God. Imagine you were Diaz in that exact second. You were watching your child drink something you prepared for your husband. What does she do?
She completely panicked. Her reaction is what gave her away in hindsight. She forced the young boy to vomit immediately, rushing him to the emergency room.
Because she knew what was in it.
Right. She even posted a photo of him getting an IV on social media, telling her followers he had caught a severe stomach bug. Later, when the police finally got involved and investigated, the toxicology test confirmed that both Diego and the young boy had ingested arsenic.
So she felt sheer panic for her son, but felt absolutely nothing watching her husband suffer for weeks.
Nothing at all.
But this brings up a huge technical question. How does a former accounting assistant know how to dose arsenic so perfectly that it mimics a common stomach bug? I mean, if you give someone too much, they die instantly, and it's an obvious murder.
The police asked that exact same question, which led them to seize all of her digital devices. When they looked at her search history, they found she'd been researching poisons for months.
So it was studying it.
She wasn't guessing, she was studying. In fact, the local police were so struck by her methodology that they officially named their entire investigation Operation Aqua Tofana.
The history behind that operation name is fascinating, and it explains exactly how she pulled this off.
It really does. Giulia Tofana was a highly notorious 17th century poisoner operating in Italy. She invented a deadly, undetectable concoction containing arsenic, lead, and belladonna.
And she disguised it, right.
Yes, she brilliantly disguised it as a standard cosmetic product. She sold this mixture to hundreds of women who were trapped in highly abusive marriages.
Wow.
The terrifying genius of Aqua Tofana was its stealth. It was completely tasteless and colorless. More importantly, it was designed to be administered in slow, methodical doses.
So it doesn't look like a poisoning at all.
Exactly. Arsenic is a heavy metal that systematically disrupts cellular respiration. It basically stops your cells from being able to use energy. When you administer it in small doses, the first dose just causes mild, cold-like symptoms. The victim feels a little tired.
Just under the weather.
Right. The second dose causes severe gastrointestinal distress, perfectly mimicking a natural common illness like dysentery or cholera. By the third or fourth dose, the person dies of organ failure.
That is so calculated.
It gave the victim time to get their affairs in order, and it left absolutely no trace for the doctors of the 1600s to find.
And Denise was resurrecting this exact 17th century playbook in 2024. She researched the chemical mechanisms online, she bought the raw chemicals herself, bizarrely using her own real name and keeping the invoices, and she mixed them at home.
She did.
She successfully tested the lethal dosage on her father-in-law, and then she tested a sublethal dose on her husband, which means by December, she was ready for the main event.
Which brings us to the Christmas massacre. Having run these grim trial runs, Dees finally set her sights on her ultimate target.
Her mother-in-law, Zelie.
Yes, the woman who had taken the $600, the woman she had been in a Cold War with for 20 years. Diaz knows that Zelie bakes a specific cake every single Christmas.
The Bolo de Natal.
Exactly. So under the guise of being a helpful, newly reconciled daughter-in-law, Diaz gifts Zelie a basket of baking supplies, including flour and powdered milk. But Diaz has heavily laced these dry ingredients with arsenic.
She planted the weapon.
She did. Zelie takes that exact flour, mixes the batter, and bakes the cake.
The tragic irony of how this played out is hard to overstate. Zelie, who was the primary target of 2 decades of simmering hatred, actually ate 2 full slices of the poisoned cake.
She did.
But because of the way her body processed it, or perhaps just the distribution of the poison in the batter, she survived. The people who died were Zelie's sister, her sister-in-law, and her niece.
And we should point out that niece who died from the poison cake was the exact same cousin who had claimed the wedding venue 20 years prior.
Oh, wow. That is just wow.
Innocent family members, who had absolutely nothing to do with these core daily grievances, were completely wiped out simply because they sat down for a holiday cup of tea.
The level of emotional detachment required to do that is staggering. And to highlight just how incredibly cold Desuise was, let's look at what she did in the immediate aftermath.
This part is chilling.
While Zelie is lying in a hospital bed, still in critical condition and fighting for her life, Denise actually comes to the hospital to visit her, and she brings gifts. She brings fruit juice and chocolates for the recovering victims.
But by this point, the family is highly suspicious. The relatives who are keeping watch over Zelie in the hospital room looked closely at the gifts and noticed that the plastic seals on the juice bottles were already broken.
She's trying to finish the job.
Yes. Fearing the absolute worst, they threw everything in the trash. The police later dug those wrappers out of the garbage to collect them for forensic testing.
Finally, on January 5th, 2025, the authorities move in and arrest Dizes. By this point, the forensic investigators have connected the massive dots. They linked the arsenic in the Christmas cake to the arsenic in the surviving husband's blood tests.
And they went even further.
Right. They even exhumed the body of the father-in-law, Paulo, and found lethal doses of arsenic in his remains, proving Diaz had blocked the autopsy for a reason.
When you look at the statements from the local police chief, Marcos Veloso, his assessment of sitting across from Diaz during interrogation is just chilling.
What did he say?
He described her as a profoundly cold person who never showed an ounce of panic. She always had a perfectly ready answer for every accusation. She appeared completely tranquil, but she was constantly trying to manipulate the narrative, telling the police that the family was just out to get her.
Just playing the victim again.
Always. The authorities boldly stated to the press, she will not leave prison in this life.
Because legally, using poison isn't just a standard murder charge, is it?
No, it elevates the severity of the crime entirely. In the Brazilian legal system, homicide obviously carries a heavy sentence, but the use of poison makes it an aggravated, heinous crime.
Because of the stealth involved.
Exactly. It is considered exceptionally cruel because it relies on deception. The victim has absolutely no chance to defend themselves, and it requires a massive degree of premeditation. Didiz was facing decades upon decades in a maximum security prison for triple aggravated homicide and triple attempted homicide.
But the reality is, she will never actually face a trial. And this is the final, shocking resolution to this story. Denise is sitting in pretrial detention. She is locked in a solitary cell in a women's penitentiary awaiting her day in court.
Yes. On February 12, 2025, Diz's husband, Diego Fena, the man who barely survived her attempt to poison him, the man who suddenly realized his own wife had meticulously murdered his family, sent his lawyer to the prison.
He finally took action.
He did. He formally requested a divorce. And as part of that request, he asked the prison guards to go to her cell and physically retrieve his wedding ring from her.
Think about the psychological weight of that moment. The last remaining link to her fabricated reality, her husband, is officially severing the tie and taking back the symbol of their marriage.
The very next morning, February 13th, during the routine morning cell checks, the prison guards found Diz dead.
Wow.
The emergency medical service was called in, and they confirmed it was a case of self-inflicted mechanical asphyxiation.
Just to be clear on the terminology for a prison setting, that simply means she used an item of clothing or a ligature inside her solitary cell to restrict her own airway,
That's
right?
exactly. There was no complex method to it, just a desperate final act to avoid facing a judge or spending the rest of her life in a cage.
Right.
But what is truly fascinating for anyone studying criminal psychology is what she left behind in that cell. Her mindset remained entirely consistent right up to her final breath.
What did they find?
She left behind pieces of paper with citations of Bible Psalms. She also took a T-shirt and wrote a message on it. The message read, "I am not a killer. I am just a weak human being with depression, suffering, and paying for the mistakes of others."
Paying for the mistakes of others, that is a total, absolute refusal of accountability.
Completely. She also left a formal letter claiming that, yes, she did buy the arsenic, but she insisted she threw it away and had absolutely no idea how it mysteriously ended up baked into the family's food. She maintained the illusion of being the victim until the very end.
It is the ultimate synthesis of a deeply disturbed mind. We started this deep dive looking at a horrific mass poisoning, but what we found was a story about how a chronic grievance can completely consume a person.
It really is a tragedy of obsession.
This was an entire family decimated, not by a random act of violence, but by a slow, simmering resentment that morphed into a highly calculated historical style of murder. It highlights the terrifying reality that extreme malice doesn't always look like a monster hiding in the shadows.
Sometimes it's right in the kitchen.
Yeah. Sometimes it hides directly behind the mundane facade of everyday family annoyances. It hides behind complaints about who gets which church for a wedding, or a mother-in-law overstepping boundaries with a bank account. It slowly poisons the mind for decades, long before it ever poisons the food.
Very true.
It really makes you pause. Think about the everyday conflicts you might have with your own family or in-laws. The passive-aggressive comments, the crossed boundaries. Most of us just vent to a friend, brush it off as normal stress, and move on with our lives.
Right, that's normal.
But what happens when a person's internal narrative becomes so insulated from reality that they view their own family not as difficult relatives, but as literal enemies who need to be eradicated? It makes you wonder, how well do you truly know what is going on inside the mind of the person sitting right across from you at the holiday dinner table? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We will see you next time.